A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. In 25, the number of people working from a different country than their employer hit 15 million. Yet the digital nomad lifestyle represents less than 2% of that total. It is wild how much the narrative around remote work focuses on the person with a laptop on a beach in Bali, when the actual data shows a completely different, much more corporate, and much more localized reality. As companies finalize their 26 hiring strategies, understanding these distinct segments is basically the difference between a functional talent pipeline and a compliance nightmare.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are hitting on the exact friction point of 26. We have moved past the emergency phase of the early 2020s and into what I would call the structural stabilization of distributed labor. The data is finally clean enough that we can stop guessing. By the way, fun fact for the listeners, today's episode is actually being powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is helping us synthesize some of this massive dataset Daniel sent over. Interestingly, the computational power required to analyze these global labor shifts has grown by 40% year over year, which mirrors the complexity of the labor market itself. It's almost as if the sheer processing power needed to track where everyone is working has become its own economic sector.
So Daniel sent us this one. He is asking, what does the data say about the global prevalence of remote work? Also, what is the prevalence of remote work within a single country, and the prevalence between employers and employees who are not in the same country? Finally, he wants to know the prevalence of digital nomads compared to remote workers who stay in a fixed location. There is a lot to unpack here, Herman. It feels like we are looking at three fundamentally different phenomena that all just happen to share the same Zoom background.
That is the perfect way to frame it. We have to stop treating remote work as a monolith. If we look at the taxonomy, we have domestic remote prevalence, cross-border employer-employee relationships, and then that tiny loud subset of digital nomads. To answer Daniel's first point on global prevalence, the January 26 Global Workplace Analytics Report is the gold standard here. It shows that 38% of the global workforce engages in some form of remote work. But, and this is a huge, but only 12% are fully remote.
12%. That is significantly lower than the vibe you get on LinkedIn. It suggests that the return to office mandates of 24 and 25 actually had some teeth, or at least they forced a compromise. But I have to wonder, is that 12% spread evenly? I mean, if you look at the tech sector versus, say, manufacturing, the gap must be cavernous.
Oh, it's a canyon. In information technology and professional services, that 12% global average jumps to nearly 45%. But when you factor in agriculture, retail, and manual labor, which still make up the lion's share of global employment, the average gets pulled way down. It's a knowledge worker privilege, essentially. But even within knowledge work, the fully remote crowd is shrinking in favor of the hybrid model. Think of a mid-sized architectural firm in Chicago. In 22, they might have been 100% remote. By 26, they've realized that while the drafting can happen at home, the collaborative redlining of physical blueprints still benefits from a shared table. That's the nuance the 12% figure hides.
It is a compromise called hybrid. When we look at the global average for paid full days worked from home, it is stabilized at about 1.2 to 1.3 days per week. But that average is deceiving because the regional disparities are massive. If you are in an English-speaking country like the US, the UK, or Australia, you are looking at 1.4 to 1.6 days. If you are in Japan or South Korea, it drops to less than 0.7 days per week.
Think about that for a second. In London or New York, the average office is essentially a ghost town on Fridays. It's reached a point where commercial real estate in those cities is pivoting to Tuesday through Thursday amenity packages. But in Tokyo, the expectation of physicality is so high that working from home even 1 day a week is often seen as a lack of commitment to the team. It's not just about the work, it's about the visible performance of the work.
I saw that Japan data. They had that huge government incentive program in 25 to drive remote work, and even with that, they only saw an 18% adoption spike. Why is the gap so wide? Is it just infrastructure? Or is there something deeper in the water? I mean, Japan has some of the fastest internet on the planet, so it clearly isn't a bandwidth issue.
It is actually cultural individualism. Research from late 25 suggests that individualism scores are the single strongest predictor of remote work adoption. It accounts for nearly 30% of the variation between countries. In a culture that values the collective and the physical presence of the group, like Japan or South Korea, the office serves a social and psychological function that a Slack channel just cannot replicate. In the US, we value the autonomy. We want the proximity premium of being in the same country for legal and time zone reasons, but we want the individual freedom to work from our spare bedroom.
But wait, how does that individualism theory hold up in Europe? You have countries like the Netherlands or Finland where remote work is incredibly high, but they have very different social structures than the US.
That's a great catch. In the Nordic countries, it's less about individualism, in the American sense, and more about high trust. The World Values Survey shows a direct correlation between how much you trust your fellow citizens and how much a manager trusts an employee they can't see. In the US, it's don't tell me what to do. In Finland, it's I trust you to get it done. Both lead to the same result, high remote adoption. But in low trust or high hierarchy cultures, the manager feels they aren't managing unless they are physically watching the work happen. It's the eyes-on management style versus the output-based style.
Let's talk about that domestic piece then, because that is where the bulk of the volume is. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics just dropped their Q4 25 data, and it shows 22.5% of US workers are either hybrid or fully remote. But the ratio is 3-to-1 in favor of hybrid. So, the fully remote dream is actually the minority, even in the most remote-friendly country on Earth.
And that 3-to-1 ratio is the new normal. It is the Goldilocks zone. Companies have realized that the domestic remote model thrives because it minimizes friction. You have time zone alignment, you have a shared legal framework, and you have cultural familiarity. Even if you are working from Austin for a company in New York, the tax forms look the same. The proximity premium isn't just about being able to grab a coffee, it is about the fact that your employer doesn't need a team of international tax lawyers to pay you.
But does domestic always mean nearby? I've seen this trend of long-distance domestic, where someone lives in rural Montana but works for a firm in Chicago. Does the data track how far these people are moving?
It does. The average commute distance for remote workers has increased from 10 miles in 21 to about 55 miles in 26. People aren't necessarily moving across the country. They are moving just far enough away that a daily commute is impossible, but a twice-a-month office visit is doable. It's what urban planners are calling the exurban expansion. It keeps the employee within the same state tax jurisdiction, which is the path of least resistance for HR. Think of it as the super-commute. You're not in the office every day, but when you are, it's a 2-hour train ride or a short flight.
Right. But even with that domestic focus, the economic incentives for the companies are staggering. I was looking at the Robert Half 26 stats, and companies are saving an average of over $11,000 per employee annually by using hybrid models. That is mostly real estate and retention. If you have 1,000 employees, you are looking at an $11 million annual bonus just for letting people work from home 2 days a week. It makes the everyone back to the office crowd look economically illiterate.
It is a massive retention risk too. 46% of current remote workers say they would quit if forced back 5 days a week. So for a CEO in 26, the math is, do I want to pay $11,000 more per person and lose half my talent just to see their faces in a cubicle? Most are concluding the answer is no. But that leads us to the second part of Daniel's prompt, the cross-border stuff. This is where the friction gets intense.
This is the 15 million person figure, right? The people working for a company in a completely different country. That is only about 2% of the global workforce, but it is the fastest growing segment. When we say cross-border, are we talking about people in Canada working for the US? Or is it more about the global north hiring from the global south?
It is exploding. Remote.com's 25 Global Employment Report puts it at exactly 15 million. And the driver here isn't just talent is everywhere. It is the rise of the employer of record, or EOR services. Companies like Deal and Remote.com grew 340% in 25. They have basically turned international compliance into a software API. To answer your question, the biggest corridor is actually Latin America to North America, followed by Eastern Europe to Western Europe. It's about nearshoring, keeping the time zones within a 4-hour window while slashing the labor costs by 30 to 50%.
So, if I'm a startup in San Francisco and I want to hire a developer in Lisbon, I don't have to open a Portuguese branch? I just pay the EOR and they handle the local taxes, the labor laws, and the benefits.
Well, I shouldn't say exactly. I should say that is the mechanism, but the complexity is still there. Even with an EOR, a small HR team in 26 is now managing compliance across an average of 3.5 different jurisdictions. That is a heavy cognitive load, and it creates this global arbitrage trend. A 25 IDC study found that 78% of companies plan to hire more than 60% of their new remote roles from international talent pools.
78%? That is a terrifying number if you are a mid-level developer in a high-cost city. You aren't just competing with the guy in the next state anymore. You're competing with the entire world, and the world is often willing to work for a lot less. How are workers in places like San Francisco or London reacting to this? Are we seeing a brain drain or just a massive salary stagnation?
We're seeing a specialization pivot. If your job can be done by anyone with a stable internet connection and a decent GitHub profile, your salary is being commoditized. The workers who are surviving and thriving are those who lean into roles that require high context knowledge. That is, knowledge that is specific to the company's local market, its physical stakeholders, or its specific regulatory environment. If you are a generalist coder, you are in a price war with a genius in Vietnam who has a lower cost of living. But if you are a coder who understands the specific legacy architecture of a Midwest utility company, you have leverage.
That is the downward pressure we are seeing on remote salaries in high-cost regions. We are seeing a shift toward nearshoring. US companies are looking at Latin America because the time zones align even if the country doesn't. European companies are looking at Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe. It is a total restructuring of the labor market. But we have to distinguish this from the digital nomad. This 15 million doesn't include the people jumping from hostel to hostel, does it?
No, those 15 million are tethered international workers. They are usually residents of the country they are in. They pay local taxes, they have local health care, they just happen to receive a paycheck from a foreign entity. The digital nomad is a different beast entirely. They are the stateless workers, at least temporarily. To put it in perspective, a tethered worker in Poland is contributing to the Polish pension system. A digital nomad in Poland is likely on a tourist visa or a special nomad visa and is essentially a long-term tourist who happens to have a laptop.
Right, the nomads. Daniel asked about the prevalence of nomads versus fixed location remote workers. The MBO Partners 25 State of Independence report says there are about 4.8 million American digital nomads. That is only 1.8% of the US workforce. Globally, the estimate is 40 million nomads. So even though 40 million sounds like a lot, it is only about 10 to 15% of the total remote workforce. The other 85 to 90% are fixed location.
And that is the biggest misconception in the media. Most remote workers are just people at home. They have a mortgage, a dog, and a favorite coffee shop 3 blocks away. They aren't traveling. The typical nomad has actually changed too. It is no longer the 22-year-old backpacker. In 25, the largest cohort is aged 30 to 39. These are mid-career professionals. We are seeing family nomads, now parents who take their kids on a world schooling tour while working for a Fortune 500 company.
Wait, family nomads? How does that even work with school schedules and health insurance? That sounds like an administrative nightmare. Is there a case study on this?
There's a fascinating look at the Boundless Life community model. They basically set up hubs in places like Portugal, Greece, and Italy where they provide the housing, the co-working space, and a specialized school for the kids. It's nomadism as a service. But even with these services, the average duration of a nomad stint has actually decreased. In 23, people were staying out for 2 years. In 25, the average is only 9 months before they return to a fixed base. The burnout is real. Imagine trying to explain long division to your 8-year-old while your 5G hotspot is failing in a rural village in the Algarve. It loses its charm quickly.
I love the idea of administrative stress being the primary deterrent for nomads. They report 82% job satisfaction, which is huge, but they are constantly battling visas and tax residency. It is like they traded the stress of a commute for the stress of a border crossing. I mean, imagine having to explain to the Italian tax authorities why you've been working from a villa in Tuscany for 6 months, while your employer is in Delaware.
It is a trade-off. Over 66 countries now offer specific digital nomad visas. Italy, Brazil, and South Korea just joined the list. But the complexity of staying compliant while moving 3.2 countries per year, which is the current nomad average, is a full-time job in itself. Compare that to the fixed location remote worker who just wants stability and local community integration. The nomad is essentially an arbitrageur of lifestyle, but they pay for it in paperwork. There was a case last year where a nomad accidentally triggered residency in 3 different EU countries simultaneously due to overlapping stay rules. It took 18 months to untangle.
So we have 3 distinct worlds. We have the domestic hybrid worker, who is the vast majority, trying to balance office culture with home life. We have the cross-border remote worker, who is part of this global talent arbitrage, often working for a foreign company through an EOR. And then we have the digital nomad, the small but loud minority living the high mobility lifestyle. What about the stealth nomad? The person who tells their boss they are in Ohio but they're actually in Mexico City.
That is the compliance ticking time bomb. A survey from late 25 found that an estimated 10% of remote workers have omitted their true location from their employer at least once. For a company, this is a nightmare. If an employee works from Mexico for more than 83 days, the company might accidentally create a permanent establishment there, making the company liable for Mexican corporate taxes. This is why we are seeing companies install geofencing software on work laptops. It sounds Orwellian, but it's a tax defense mechanism.
That feels so invasive. But I guess from a corporate liability standpoint, they don't have a choice. If the proximity premium is about legal safety, then a stealth nomad is a huge liability. Does the data show how often these people actually get caught?
More often than you'd think. It's usually the little things, a LinkedIn login from a foreign IP, or the background noise of a tropical storm during a meeting when it's supposed to be snowing in Ohio. The fallout is usually immediate termination because it's not just a policy violation, it's a legal risk to the entire firm. And for an employer, the strategy for each has to be different. You cannot have a single remote work policy that covers all 3. Domestic remote needs a real estate strategy. Do we keep the office or downsize? Cross-border remote needs a compliance and EOR strategy. How do we pay someone in Manila without getting audited? And nomad-friendly policies need a visa and tax risk strategy. If you try to lump them together, you end up with the remote paradox that Gallup found in 25.
The one where remote workers have higher engagement but lower thriving scores. Can you explain that distinction? It sounds like a contradiction.
It's the difference between I like my tasks and I like my life. They are engaged in the work because they have fewer interruptions and can focus deeply. But they feel more isolated and stressed because the boundaries between home and work have dissolved. Hybrid seems to be the Goldilocks zone because it provides the social anchor of the office without the 5-day grind. It is the only segment of the 3 that actually addresses the loneliness factor that spiked in 24 and 25. Think about it. If you're domestic hybrid, you still have work friends you see on Tuesdays. If you're a cross-border worker in a different time zone, you might never have a real-time conversation with a colleague that isn't about a specific ticket or task.
It is interesting that the global arbitrage piece is effectively a war tax on high-cost talent. If 78% of companies are looking abroad, then the local salary is effectively dead for remote-capable roles. You are either a specialist who is so good the company doesn't care about the cost, or you are competing on a global price floor. But does this create a race to the bottom for wages globally, or a race to the top for workers in developing nations?
It's both. For a developer in Lagos, Nigeria, working for a New York firm, it's a massive race to the top. They might be making 5 times the local average salary. But for the developer in New York, it's a race to the bottom because their employer is looking at that Lagos salary and wondering why they are paying New York rates for the same lines of code. This is why location-based pay is such a heated debate in 26. Some companies are moving to a global flat rate based on the role, but that usually means the rate is pinned to a mid-tier market like Warsaw or Mexico City, which is a massive pay cut for someone in San Francisco.
That is the harsh reality of 26. The geography of talent has been mapped, and the borders are porous for money, but still stiff for people. Companies are realizing they can gain a massive advantage by navigating that complexity. Look at a company like GitLab. They have been 100% remote across 70-plus countries for years, using a location-agnostic compensation model. Well, not agnostic, but location-based. They have the blueprint that everyone else is now trying to copy-paste.
But even GitLab has to deal with the social tax. They spend a fortune on annual retreats because they know that without physical proximity at least once a year, the trust battery of the team eventually runs dry. Most companies aren't ready for that level of intentionality. They want the cost savings of remote work without the cultural investment required to make it sustainable. They want the 15 million cross-border workers, but they don't want to spend the money to fly them to a central hub once a quarter. That lack of investment is why we see high turnover in that segment.
But GitLab is the exception, not the rule. Most companies are still stumbling through the proximity premium phase. They want the person in the same country because they are scared of the unknown legal variables. I think the takeaway for anyone listening is to audit which segment you actually fall into. Are you a domestic hybrid worker? Then your value is tied to your ability to integrate into that office culture a few days a week. Are you a cross-border worker? Your value is tied to being a high-skill, lower-cost alternative to domestic talent.
And if you are a nomad, your value is your flexibility, but your risk is the administrative overhead. We're going to see a race to the top for quality of life benefits from countries trying to attract these nomads. Think high-speed rail, universal 6G, and simplified tax codes. But a race to the bottom on tax rates for the companies doing the hiring. The countries that win the next decade will be the ones that make it easiest for companies to hire their citizens remotely. Look at Estonia with their e-residency program. They were a decade ahead of the curve, and now everyone is trying to build their own version of that digital infrastructure.
So what is the one-year outlook? Does AI make this easier? I mean, if we're using Gemini 3 to analyze this data, surely there's an AI that can handle the tax compliance for a worker moving between Croatia and Montenegro.
I think by 27, we see AI-powered compliance tools that make cross-border remote work as seamless as domestic. Imagine a smart contract payroll system that automatically adjusts your tax withholding in real time based on your GPS location. Once the legal friction is automated away, the 15 million cross-border figure could double. That is when the real global labor shift hits the fan. We're moving toward a world where your employer is just a set of tasks and your office is wherever you happen to be standing, but the infrastructure for that is still being built in real time. We're essentially waiting for the legal software to catch up to the Zoom capability.
It's like we're in the dial-up phase of global labor. We can see where it's going, but the connection keeps dropping and the fees are outrageous. I wonder if we'll look back in 10 years and laugh at the idea that we used to have to live in the same state as our boss just to make the taxes easy.
We absolutely will. It'll be like explaining a physical filing cabinet to a Gen Alpha kid. The idea of geographic employment will feel like a relic of the industrial age. But for now, in 26, the data says the office isn't dead. It's just become a part-time destination rather than a full-time requirement.
It is a wild time to be a worker, or a donkey, or a sloth. There is a lot to think about there, especially for those of us trying to navigate these shifts without losing our minds or our health insurance. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes and making sure our audio doesn't sound like it's coming from a cave in the Andes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and our research pipeline. Without that compute, we'd still be crunching these 26 numbers by hand.
If you found this dive into the remote work data useful, or if you're currently a stealth nomad hiding in a beach hut, check us out at myweirdprompts.com. You can find our full RSS feed there, detailed charts on the regional disparities we mentioned, and all the ways to subscribe. This has been My Weird Prompts.
We will catch you in the next one. Stay remote, or don't. Just stay productive.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth